So, hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar on scaling the go-to-market strategy. Richard Marriott from Scale has kindly agreed to host this, and yeah, he'll take us through it. So, without further ado, let's get started. Richard.
Cool. Yeah, good to meet you guys, and thanks for popping along to the webinar today. I think we're going to try and do sort of 20 to 25 minutes of me taking you through the presentation. But I'm also acutely aware that no two businesses look the same, so we want to try and leave a bit of time for questions at the end as well. I'll just try and share my screen, so hopefully that's going to work okay. Has everybody got that?
Yep.
Cool. Right. Hopefully the tech's not going to let me down. Right. Okay. So without further ado, we'll jump in. But obviously today's session is learnings from running sort of 25-ish, probably a few more, go-to-markets for SaaS and service-based businesses. Hopefully you find the session useful and insightful. But as I said, any questions at the end, what we'll try and do is go through them one by one. And if we ever run, I'm fine for time this evening, but if we ever run from there, then I've got all my contact details in, and you feel free to drop me a bit of a note afterwards. So a little bit about me. I don't like harping on about myself too much either, so I won't leave too much of the 20 years worth of detail in there. But yeah, sort of been in sales and marketing for just over 20 years now. 10 years client side, just over 10 years sort of agency side, and the last couple of those has been with Scaled as a senior partner for a boutique B2B growth agency. During that time, in the last decade, sounds like a long time, but it feels like about 2 minutes. 8 of those years was scaling an agency's sales and marketing machine from sort of 2 million turnover to 20 million turnover. That included a merger and an exit at the end, which was fairly significant. And happy to talk about that to any of you guys separately as well. But over the last couple of years, obviously working for Scaled, have been dipping into a lot of SaaS and agency and service-based businesses as well. So that's kind of what today's session is focused on. So the agenda really of what I want to run through is where I see go-to-market strategies going wrong. There's a lot of people doing them to varying degrees, and I think it's fair to say that sales is perhaps harder now than it ever has been, right? Unless you've got a one-off in the market, there's lots of competition, so it's about how to try and cut through some of that noise. Why go-to-market is important, and it's not just a case of plugging in a sales team and running through a black book, or plugging in a marketeer and expect them to do absolutely everything from kind of the initial awareness piece all the way through to retention and cross-sell and upsell. How to think a little bit differently, how to measure it, and then, as I said, at the end, we've got some time for Q&A as well. So the 3 key areas in where I see it go wrong. The first one is audience, right? So there's some amazing tech out there at the moment. There's some fantastic AI. Automation is, the best it's ever been, but sort of B2B marketing has lost its way a little bit, and it's become a little bit obsessed with either the new shiny thing or isolated channels and metrics that won't help deliver growth potential. And I think a lot of the time, the 101 of marketing is, going back to customer, understanding the customer pain point, and then building a plan and service around that. So the challenges that we see a lot of the time are a real lack of focus on that customer pain. I don't think it goes deep enough. I think people understand it a little bit, but we don't get right into the underbelly of, what keeps people up at night time and what are their real kind of deepest pain points. And then that allows us to create messaging, whether it's service design or the kind of content that we produce as part of the marketing plan, or even what the sales team are saying to prospects. It's all around solving that pain. Market segmentation, and a real understanding of who and what are your most valuable customer segments, and then allowing you to focus the majority of your time on getting that through. Assumed knowledge and that one size fits all. It's like, this is my ICP, and it's almost like set and forget, and that there's a lot of assumptions in there and outdated findings, or based on conversations on how people used to do things and not what they do now. So it's about how do we sort of iterate and constantly keep this refreshed. And then a real lack of understanding of the buying committee. So more often than not, obviously the champion is the person that will do the research. We need to think a little bit beyond that around, the blockers and what content do we need to produce to kind of help appease their needs and concerns as well. So audience has to be the first thing on the list. The next is misconceptions. Um, obviously, buyer journeys have changed a lot, and I think probably in the early 2010s, a lot of people thought, and almost you still see it to an extent now, is that the more stuff you put in at the top of the funnel, the more that's going to drop through. And to an extent, that's true, but it doesn't go like lead, MQL, SQL, opportunity, customer. People buy in a very different way to that. Buying journeys have changed. And this is an example of what I borrowed from another example from another site to say, look, this is how complex the buying journey can be. We need to think about triggers, category consideration, like how we get people into the funnel, and then all of these different touch points. You can see on this side here on the right hand side that was whether it's LinkedIn messaging or content hubs or private shares, LinkedIn follow-ups, one-to-one conversations. Sales is complicated, more so now than ever before. Not only that, on the image on the left-hand side, it stopped at customer. We need to think about, go-to-market as expansion and upsells of sales and existing clients as well. Also think like probably over the last decade, the way people buy is very different as well. So, people used to attend a lot of trade shows pre-internet, then Google came along and everyone just used to Google everything. And now there's a thing that we refer to, and again, I'm hoping I'm not teaching anyone to suck eggs too much, but it's called dark social. So that's WhatsApp group, it's Slack communities, it's private shares that you guys can't actually see happening, and sort of starts to lean as much on brand and reputation than anything else. So a couple of just quick stats as well. Up to 84% of B2B web pages that now get shared across internally is now done on private channels such as Slack, email, instant message. This piece came out, I think it was back in June now, from Pavilion and Trust Radius, but 86% of enterprise buyers shortlist people before they do more detailed research based on having heard of them before. So it shows the importance of brand. And then 56%-ish, or if it's enterprise 71, looked for a peer conversation before they started to buy. So this just starts to show the importance of what we call dark social, and that a lot of the purchase process happens pre somebody coming through to the site. And then the final thing where we start to see it go wrong is sort of KPIs and reporting metrics, because there's still a lot of silos between sales, marketing, and customer success as well to an extent. So essentially it leads to the wrong behaviors being optimized for people still looking at how many MQLs do we need, marketing patting themselves on the back and saying, yeah, great job, we've delivered 100 MQLs, and then chucking it over the wall to sales, and sales trying to do something with it. But essentially, more often than not, the MQLs aren't massively engaged and leads to low quality conversations. So then what do sales guys do? They take the path of least resistance and try and find their own way, whether it's incentivizing book meetings or, doing their own thing that's kind of really disconnected from the marketing piece as well. So yeah, they're the three areas in where I see it going wrong. Why is it important? Because not all leads are created equally. So what we try and look for now, when we in terms of for SaaS clients in particular, higher volume and service-based businesses, is declared intent sources and treat them very different to lower intent sources, right? So on the left, you can see the conversion rates of lead to win for high intent sources is at 3.8%, at 3.8%. When I say high intent sources, that's people coming directly to the site. It's demo requests. It's people that are actually, as I call, in market, rather than feeding the old MQL model, should I say, where a download is considered a lead. But you can see what happens there. There's an awful lot of churn in those numbers because it kind of proves the point that they're not in market, and you have to really, really work those leads extremely hard. Like it's 10x. If you look at the lead volume of direct inquiries in that top level, 2,500 versus 20,000 downloads. But actually the revenue won is significantly higher on the declared intent. Now, obviously, this is different for every single model or every single business. No two look the same, but kind of gives you a bit of a flavor of why it's important. And not only that, we need to consider the amount of time that we invest. When I say time, like sales and marketing investment, whether it's people costs or production costs, in delivering all of those MQLs. And I'm not saying that MQLs are dead. I'm not saying they're a waste of time. What I'm just trying to say is that leads are created differently, and we need to start to focus on the ones that are high intent revenue opportunities. So we call it high road pipeline. And here's an example from just last week for a client that we've been doing some work with. We can see that we separated out declared intent and pure outbound. They have an SDR model where they have a great SDR team, really, really talented. But the challenge is that a demo takes an hour to deliver for those guys, right? And we can see that declared intent versus outbound, you don't need me to read you through the numbers, I'm sure. But if people are coming into the funnel with declared intent, they convert significantly higher. Not as much as the last example, but sort of 3.5 to 4 times higher than what we do if it's pure outbound. So I'm not saying again that SDRs are a waste of investment, because they're not. We need to think about how do we repurpose the SDR's time. Their roles are super important now, and perhaps harder than ever before with all the levels of automation that are in place, with cold outbound emailing, LinkedIn automation. So cutting through that noise is actually can be quite a challenge for them, and their roles on the front line is to not only like nurture prospects, they need to think about how they feed insights back into marketing to answer those pain points as well, right? So again, I could do a whole separate session on the value of SDRs, but I'll leave it fairly light for now. Alongside that, just in this example, what we've tried to do is repurpose that SDR time. So we've got like some basic lead scoring in place, looking at first party intent data, so we can see when people are becoming in market. So that could be when someone visits a pricing page, when someone visits case studies, starts to build a bit of a score. We've got them chasing down referral requests. That was a bright idea to put that in his notes. But yeah, I think so much opportunity is missed by not following up and asking for referrals. It's untrue. And then the other part of the role now is to nurture. So as we release new content for this SaaS brand, what we're doing is thinking about what contacts might that work for, and make sure that the SDRs are actually sending it out and value adding outside of just picking up the phone and hitting volumes of emails and calls. So now we'll jump into a little bit about how to fix it. I think we need to think about how we flip the funnel. And by that, I don't mean don't do any demand creation, as we call it. So I break it down into, or we like in the industry, we talk about demand creation. So that's kind of like your thought leadership. Demand capture, that's when someone's in market and they're actively looking and starting to search for your product or service. And then demand conversion. But a lot of the time, marketing investment, right, will go right into the top for demand creation, or it'd be brand. And the website might look like a dog's dinner, or we might not be thinking about how to convert that demand once we drive it to the site. So I think it's really important to think about how we might flip the funnel. So convert demand. Let's think about how we reduce friction. Can we offer free demos? Can we route opportunities directly to experts rather than through to salespeople? Can we build some more trust signals? So, reviews, video testimonials, case studies, pricing, like how are we going to get people over the line? Then we think about capture demand. I read a report and 70% plus of people still use Google in search, and I've done more than 100 ICP interviews in the last year. Whilst it's not as important as what it used to be, and it's not a final deciding factor, a lot of people still go to search to look for it. So how do we think about being visible? Not saying Google's the only way. Obviously, we've got other channels like LinkedIn. I think Reddit's a massively underutilized channel as well, especially for B2B. But I think there's a huge opportunity in making sure that when people are in market, that you've got some level of visibility. I've added the percentages as well, just quickly, so we can see that actually sort of 80% of your total addressable market is not in market, probably more in all reality. And it's only sort of 3 to 5% of people at any one time that are actually ready to buy. So it's about how do we make sure we're the best we possibly can be when people are actually sort of in market and ready. And then there's the create demand as well. So that's your thought leadership stuff. That's the engagement, that's the brand awareness, that's the being present in conversations and contributing to thought leadership. It's audience focused. So then as part of that, we talk about reinventing your go-to-market. So there's a 10-step process. And again, I'm sure we'll share the slides around afterwards and can kind of talk through any of this separately if we need to. But we like to look at account segmentation and velocity, ICP definition, service design and product-led growth, account messaging and targeting, competitor analysis, pricing, channel selection, tech, that's things like your CRM setup and management, and then your existing assets. So what collateral have you got in place? And then finally, it's around KPIs and alignment to the team. So we'll have a quick walk through each of those segments now. And again, I could do a separate session on probably each of them, but I'm conscious we've got sort of 40 to 45 minutes, said 20 to 25 minutes of chatting, then a bit of time for questions. So I'll try and rattle through these fairly quickly, but I think it's really important to define key segments, understand your best performing sectors by industry size, revenue, and then we can look at won-loss data to figure out where do we have a right to prospect and where do we have a right to win. A lot of the time, I see people wanting to be everything to everyone, and there's not a problem with that, right? But disqualification, and I'm not saying that you're not going to win or take those clients on, but it's just as important to kind of think about who we're not going to focus on, I think is fair to say, rather than completely disqualify. Deal velocity is a really important one for me personally, because I think it allows us to look at a bit of a pulse check on how the business or how sales is performing. I've added the formula in there for that, and happy to chat through that again separately. But essentially what we want to try and do is look at deal velocity as a bit of a benchmark. So you can run that on a quarterly basis. So run that quarterly by quarterly. But then if you get a little bit deeper into the data, and again, depending on the size of the business and how much data you have or don't have, you can run it by firmographic, you can run it by sector, you can run it by service, you can run it by product, right? And then we can see what's the most valuable sectors and where are we winning the most and where aren't we? And I think there's not always a hard and fast answer out the back of this data, but in 6 months' time, if things start to slow down or speed up, you can have a benchmark of what good looks like or what average looks like, and then build on it from there. Conducting ideal customer profiles. I don't know how many people may or may not have done that already, but if you've not, I suggest you spend time doing it. It's one of the most valuable things that our clients get out of part of this kind of revised go-to-market process. We look at, and it's qualitative, right? So it's a sit-down interview with your key customers. It doesn't have to be your client. It can be a prospect as well. If it's a prospect, I'd probably recommend thinking about how you can incentivize them, whether that's some sort of donation to their favorite charity or whatever it could be. We need to get those guys on the phone and get them talking, because we're looking for like the sound bites of information that come out of these things, or where they're really, really animated. You can see when they're, getting a bit pissed off with something, or, like you push the how, the what, and the why, and we don't just ask them a question and get a one-line answer and go away with it. It's like, okay, but why do you do that? And how do you do that? And I think doing this and not listening with what we talk about as happy years, so it's not all bright and rosy. We want the good and the bad. Creates a really, really solid foundation in which we base a lot of the go-to-market on. I've highlighted this as critical because not many people do it to the level in which I think it needs to be done. And as I've mentioned, sort of segmentation, sales velocity, and ICP insights create that foundation of which to then kick on and build the go-to-market. One sec. So I think a lot of people will have personas, right? And a lot of businesses are going to have personas. In fact, I was in with one just yesterday, and they're like, "Yeah, we've got our persona," and they had a marketing manager, and it was fairly generic, which is fine to an extent. But I think doing the ICP research and getting those sound bites of information just allows you to create that next level of detail in the personas that you're producing. So that's what we'd say. Use your ICP interviews to produce the personas. Every piece of content that you produce needs to talk to one of those personas in one of those sectors. And ensure you consider everybody in the buying committee when you're looking at it. So it's not just, your champion. We need to think about what does a persona look like that might be a decision maker or a blocker. And within that, we've got things like pain points and challenges, their knowledge, what's their expectation, what's important to them, what's not important to them, what channels are they using, what are the reasons to buy, what are their influences. And once we start to produce content, we can look at, okay, are we talking to these personas? Are we giving them the right content on the right channel in the right place? And I'm not saying these are set and forget either, but it gives you a bit of a foundation in which to build your kind of marketing plan from. Run a simple SWOT. I'm sure everybody's done this, so I'm not going to harp on about how to do that. But I think it's really useful to look at that with you through the lens of your revised ICP insight. So just have a quick revisit of your competitor analysis. And then start to think about service design. And again, I'm sure a lot of people have been really diligently through the process of setting up their product or service or whatever it is you guys do as founders. But thinking about the customer benefits, are we highlighting the customer benefits across the whole buying committee, not just for one or two of them? And how can they relate with your service offering? Think about what makes you guys different, like ensuring that the proposition is game changing and has a really market wide appeal. And then think about the value. So what's the value that you add? And then make sure it's kind of real and achievable for the client. So the process of that part is a homepage and a wireframe collection which exhibits messaging tonality and talks to the customer's deepest pains from those ICP pain points that we spoke about earlier, and articulates how you deliver value and solve problems in really, really simple language. Because we can overcomplicate things sometimes, can't we? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process flow and give you a quick example of that as well. Conscious of time, but what we try and do is when we talk about service design, think about your now and next service list. How are you going to cross-sell, upsell, grow your existing client base? Write down the pain points, and then of each of those, potential at a service level, and then think about the messaging for each of them. Then look at the tonality and how to clearly explain them. Test them against the why in your belief system and kind of the things that you talk about on your homepage and your about us page to make sure it's all kind of starting to wrap together. And then think about what are the strongest 1 to 3 pain points. And then that makes your homepage or can also help develop service pages. So what I want to do is just run you through a quick example. You will not be able to read this unless your eyes are incredible, which is fine, but I'll kind of summarize it for you. So essentially, different brains work in different ways. Like some people like to do this in a spreadsheet and run it across. This guy and team were clearly a little more creative in how they did things, so they like to kind of do a bit of a mind map. So it's kind of whatever works for you. But we think about your why and your belief system, right? That's where we start. Then we go into your how before thinking about the services that you can apply to your how. So these guys are a UX agency. I'm just going to look over here because my screen's a bit bigger and I can just about read it. So they talk about market research, they talk about data and insights, and they talk about using UX as a data-led approach to building and improving product. So then from their ICP, what they did was they produced the pain points from the interviews, and then they think about what's the primary and secondary messaging, and how do we start to answer those pain points, much like we was talking about in that process flow earlier. And then finally, it's that reinforcement messaging. So we have to say things multiple times for as humans to understand. So it's like primary and secondary messaging if we can get it done, and then what's the reinforcement messaging of that. I think for me, the best part that comes out of this is then mapping the content or the content areas that you've got on the site at the minute, whether it's product or service page, and then thinking about what content have you got that actually helps answer those pain points throughout that process. So that kind of forms the basis of the sales and marketing content plan. And we start with a content gap analysis. So just flicking back quickly. So if you've got gaps and you've done this process and you've got a lot of gaps in it, what I suggest is we probably start to think about filling those gaps to begin with. But we also want to build content for the influencer, the gatekeeper, the decision maker, and the blocker, and understand how do we prioritize that. From there, it's about building a tactical framework. So thinking about, okay, what do we need to do to be able to get this thing moving and off the ground? What are the tactics in terms of the channel tactics that we start to deliver? And when do we need to deploy them across what part of the kind of awareness to decision process in that? And once we've got that, and you might not want to build a sheet for it, you might just want to kind of note it down, you can then start to build your content plan. So we'll give you a quick example of how that works, but before we do it, my top 6 watchouts are: don't overfill the calendar, right? If you're a small team or if you've got a small marketing team, you need to make sure it's deliverable. The easiest thing, and I've seen it time and time again, is get a spreadsheet, fill it full of information, right? And then it just gets forgotten, nobody delivers it, and it's a waste of time doing the whole thing. So make sure it's deliverable. Make sure that every piece of content has a purpose. Align it back to those ICPs, back to those personas that we spoke about earlier, and also think about how you can add nuances on sectors, so you can get kind of sector-specific content, and allow kind of SDRs to use those assets as well. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, think about channel content first. So if your audience are on LinkedIn, create content that's more specific to LinkedIn rather than kind of reverse engineering it and doing a blog first for then to go and do a LinkedIn post. Think about how you do it the other way around. Repurpose, right? So start with the most difficult piece of content and then rework it. So as an example, if I'm running today's webinar, I might record the session, take the whole half an hour, 40 minutes from it, use the Q&A as one piece of content for a video, break that video down into blog posts in terms of, what founders most struggle with when they go to market, use the rest of the presentation to create YouTube shorts or even TikTok, because once you've got the big piece of content, it's actually quite easy to spin the smaller pieces of content out the back of it. Then think about how you collate a newsletter. All you've got to do is consolidate that content into a simple newsletter, and you have a frequent piece of insight going out to your database, which building first-party data is really hard. And what we want to try and do is, once we've got them, we want to keep them engaged until they're ready to buy. As we mentioned earlier, over 80% of your audience are not going to necessarily be in the market, so we need to constantly engage them. And then consider partnerships. Miss one. Leverage experts within your business. Whether you're a SaaS business and people of a certain sector, you might have an industry expert, you might be the expert yourself as a founder, but we need to think about how to use that to leverage thought leadership. We've all seen it on LinkedIn. I'm not going to teach you how to suck eggs anymore, but it's those pieces of content that get the most traction, build the most audience, and you need to build the brand at the first, the most opportunity to build that brand. And more often than not, that's where it's coming from. It's not coming through reaching out through brand, it's coming out through personal LinkedIn. Then consider partnerships as well. So think about how to rent an audience, right? So who in your sector, what are the titles that they read? Where are your audience spending time? Can you get in front of them through a partnership, through a podcast, through speaking at events, through contributing to guest articles? We wrote a piece the other week just on HubSpot because we was asked to contribute to it. We know that some of our audience spend time there, so we produce content and are happy to contribute to that as well. So that'd be my top 6 tips. And then document the plan. Happy to share something like this around with you guys afterwards if you find it useful. It's not rocket science, but it's a clearly documented plan that looks at the tactic, the project, when that's going to be delivered. And then under category, what I like to try and add in is lead gen, demand creation, demand capture, demand conversion, and retention, to make sure that when you zoom out, you can see, okay, we're not putting all our eggs in just that first basket. We're thinking about how to retain, how to convert, and everything else as well, because it's too easy to go after just one little part and miss opportunity on others. So I think it's important to have a centralized content calendar so you can hold people accountable for delivering that content as well. Whether that's a marketing manager or whether that's you guys internally asking, product experts to be contributing to the plan, I just think having something centralized is super valuable. And then it's about how do we define measurement and success metrics, right? Because attribution is pretty much impossible still. I'm still yet to see anything that's working well. So at a top level, and again, could do a separate session on that, thinking about sales and marketing spend versus net new pipeline generated and new clients won is normally quite a decent place to start. Obviously, won revenue, contract value, conversion rate, deal velocity and cycle, the equation that we looked at a little bit earlier on. How much high intent pipeline value is being created. Obviously, we looked at the 2 different pipelines earlier. We don't just want to reward marketers for getting downloads and MQLs. We need to think about, do they fit our ICP? How many high intent contacts and hand raisers are we adding? You can add low intent contacts as well, but that's a smaller metric. Number of engaged contacts is quite good. First party data volume, because we need to build that over a period of time. And then target account engagement. That was a very speedy run through. We're going to have probably 10-15 minutes for questions, which we can go through separately. I'll cancel the pres in a minute. And just as part of this and part of our relationship with Blackfinch, what we're doing is we're offering a free 30-minute go-to-market surgery as well. So if there's things that you want to troubleshoot or quiz me on or share learnings or just chat through, then happy to set that up. So yeah, feel free to drop me a LinkedIn connection. And yeah, I think the plan is for the Winston to share the slides around afterwards. So it's got my LinkedIn on there and my email address, and feel free to reach out and give me a shout. And hopefully you've found that 30 odd minutes useful. I'll stop sharing now and we can jump into questions if that's okay.
Yeah, fantastic. No, thank you. Thank you so much.